Welcome back to the Combo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula. Fiorella is on assignment. She will be back on soon. As you saw, she was in the studio in the other day. We had an amazing show. If you haven't checked it out, please go and do so. But as you know, she's traveling around, and she will be back on the ground soon in Moscow. She had did a video with Kovork. If you haven't checked it out, just go to her Twitter and check it out. It's a great video giving an analysis about what we're going to talk about today, because I'm paying close attention to my WhatsApp, and I have an anti-imperialist group over there with a bunch of people I met in Nicaragua, and they're even saying, one person in particular says, I have a pretty good grasp on what's going on foreign policy-wise, but this is the first time ever I have no idea what is going on. There are different opinions out there of what it could be. I think Alexander McKay, he did this amazing video on YouTube. He has a very great understanding of what the Russian government is going through and what it's like. A lot of people in the States are very ignorant to it. They think that Putin is some sort of dictator or has complete control and complete authority of what's going on, but it's very much different than that. And he gives a great analysis of what's going on and the issues that Putin has to deal with. So there's some people out there who think that this came from within. The Communist Party of Russia was actually supportive of Vladimir Putin going into Ukraine, and they were actually sending aid to the Donbass way before Putin even started the military operations. Excuse me. Apologize for that. And the Communist Party was very cooperative and supportive of the Russian Federation going in there. But some people weren't within Putin government. And Putin still has a lot of oligarchs to deal with, a lot of oligarchs that came into power shortly after, not Gorbachev, when Gorbachev came, had left the country and the USSR fell. So a lot of Putin's dealing with a lot of those things within his own government. So I think a lot of people are talking about that as well. But there's a lot of people out there like Scott Ritter and our good friend today who's going to come on and explain to us. That is Don Debar is here, and he's going to give us his analysis. I just listened to his video with Mark Sloboda, and it was very, very interesting. And, Don, your theory makes sense here. I put up your blog. Would you like me to read it, or would you like to read it a little bit?
Sure,
really
go
quickly?
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so it says, I'm going to check this out. If you could please, first of all, let's play the meme that won the weekend. You retweeted it. I retweeted it. If people don't know what happened, the Wagner Group pretty much turned around. The Wagner Group, which is a mercenary group that was spawned out of the Russian military, they are mercenaries. They get paid. They're fighting heavily in Ukraine. I believe there's close to 25,000 troops plus. Well, about 5,000, I think, reported right now, turned around and started marching towards Moscow, where their leader, Prigozhin, was very upset about the leader and the military moves within Russia. So they were marching, and American media, Western media, Mario on the Wall, Nikki Haley, all these people are going to play later, just went crazy. It's a civil war. Putin has a crack in his armor. But then eventually they stopped with negotiations by the Belarusian president, Lukashenko, and made some deals. But let's take a look at this meme. This is the meme that won the weekend. Don retweeted it and I retweeted it. Check it out. Gotta appreciate it, Don. Gotta appreciate it. And just to put up his blog real quick, because I want people to go to Don Debar's blog, because he's very descriptive of it. It says, on June 24th, 2023, the Wagner mercenary force moved from the battlefield in Ukraine, where it served as an adjunct to the Russian military in the special military operation in Ukraine, into Russia, stationing in Rostov-on-Don. From there, the force began to march to Moscow. The action was taken, according to the head of the mercenary force, to remedy what he called corruption, which he claimed without providing particulars. The action eventually subsided after negotiations with the president of Belarus, Lukashenko. At the time of the action, the mercenary force, NATO, was deeply involved in an operation called Air Defender 23, which was, and still ongoing, the largest aerial force deployment in the history following World War II. Led by the German Air Force that invaded the Soviet Union 82 years ago, this past Thursday, causing ultimately some 27 million Soviet, mostly Russian deaths. The drill involved 250 aircraft and a core military force of 10,000 troops. It began on June 12th and was slated officially to end this past Friday. The exercise on the Russian border was supposed to send a significant message to Moscow, according to Lieutenant General Ingo Gerhardt of the German Luftwaffe, I can't even say it, that we can defend ourselves. And the addition to the 10 days of the operation of the massive aerial armada, which led up to the apparent coup attempt on Saturday, the reports from several sources at multiple locations in the military and the U.S. military mobilization for the overseas movement. In that context, I appeared on Press TV on Saturday at approximately 1 p.m. Eastern. See the video here. Go watch it, ladies and gentlemen. It's a good video. And suggested that these actions taken by the mercenary group had been done in coordination with the NATO exercise and was likely engineered by the U.S. I posted a video of the news opinion piece on my YouTube page Sunday morning in the New York Times. Sunday morning, New York Times, sorry, not in the New York Times, and received notice that it was blocked by YouTube, meaning the only way one would be able to see it is if they had already had a link to it. YouTube claimed that the copyright claim for 55 seconds of footage of the 9-minute, 19-second. They do that shit all the time. The footage was the footage was video apparently taken of the mercenary group inside Russia that was shown in a split screen with Press TV's Moscow correspondent Marina Kortunova reporting from the Russia's capital about what appeared to be a march on the city by the mercenary group. According to YouTube, that 55 seconds of B-roll is the property of the radio television Canaria SA, a media group based in the Canary Islands. There is something called the Fairness Doctrine, which carves out a safe space for copyright law for a variety of uses. Certainly, the incidental use of generic scenes of public highways with an illegal hostile military force in order to report upon and intercept an apparent attempt at regime change in nuclear power falls into this category. If the radio television Canaria SA agrees, then I'd like to ask them to produce the release from the Russian government for them to capture and claim property of the images of the Russian state property. I'd also like to explore the property rights arrangements between the renegade mercenary force in the midst of a criminal treasonous action and radio television Canaria SA, whereby the latter was able to acquire property rights in the images of the former. Now, I got to tell you something, Don. A lot of this stuff here kind of lends credence to what you're saying. We have pictures, and we'll get into them shortly, of all these military actions of things happening around the United States. I sent it to Cheese Slice, our engineer down below, and he's like, no, I didn't hear about that. They're mobilizing movement all around the states. Now, if they send some military hardware overseas, that means they would have to rearrange shit in the states to compensate for that. And a lot of the blockage on YouTube would also lend credence to the state using YouTube to block any type of information coming out so they can form their narrative. So why don't you give us a little insight to what you thought was going on and maybe some insight to why you thought this was happening the way it was happening?
Well, and start with the fact that, the offensive or counteroffensive, whatever, all the equipment and training and the hundreds of gazillions of dollars that went over to Ukraine was supposed to bear fruit in what they were calling a spring offensive. And as we entered June and there was still no sign of this, people were starting to wonder where the money was. And they finally began some military activity across a broad line of contact with the Russian forces and the Wagner forces, which are part of like an hired adjunct to the Russian forces. That heated up for a minute in maybe the beginning of the middle of the first week of June. And within a week of that, it was clear it was faltering, that they didn't have any significant breakthrough, that they were losing. They had already lost something like a third of the equipment that they had, and they were taking huge personnel casualties. And while that was going on, suddenly there was an announcement that there was going to be this huge NATO aerial drill it's called Air Defense 23 or something, that was going to involve 250 planes, 10,000 troops from 20 different countries, placement of troops in Lithuania, in the Baltics, basically, positioning active military, resources in Poland and Romania and all the contact points along the Russian border. At the same time that Ukrainians are lobbing bombs into Russia proper, not just Donbass, but into the Russia that even the United States agrees is Russia. You start looking at a pattern, and if you're thinking in military terms, you're wondering, this can't possibly succeed on the ground in Ukraine while Russia dominates the skies. But now there's 250 military aircraft in the air, heading towards the border, supposedly drilling. And then suddenly, while all of this stuff is in motion, you have this little thing go on with, Rogozin saying, and basically doing a Julius Caesar imitation, where he's going to cross the River Don with his troops and enter the city of Moscow, like Caesar did with the Rubicon entering Rome, which was forbidden. It appeared to me to be you have a number of considerations around this. If the Ukrainian offensive is going to have any success, and the success that they've declared they need is a recapturing of the territories of Ukraine at the border as the borders existed in 2013. In other words, the actual taking of Crimea, which had never been achieved. The Russian military base there has been occupied by the Russians solely since 1783. But the capture of that and the recapture of the republics of the Donbass is the declared aim of the efforts, the military efforts of the Ukrainians, and the eviction of the Russians from that territory. Well, it was clear, no matter how much money they threw at this, militarily it's impossible unless they obtain command of the skies and they can suppress Russia's ability to project power into Ukraine, which of course is an absurdity because they share a border with the entire northern part of Ukraine. So in order to achieve those things, you're basically going to have to engage in a direct war with Russia. And you're going to have to occupy some parts of Russia that adjoin Ukraine so that they can't supply their, military resources inside there. So what you're talking about, in essence, is an invasion of Russia if you're going to win in Ukraine. And of course, if you invade Russia, then Russia fights back, and suddenly things start lighting up in North America and Europe and maybe Japan or who knows where else. And so if you're looking at the landscape from the point of view of the people who do planning here, whether it's in the Pentagon or Langley or Biden's bathroom or wherever, and you see this large mercenary force. Mercenary force is an army that is for hire. And for hire in business generally means for sale to the highest bidder. If you were able to contact the people who own that particular resource and offer them more money than they're getting to switch sides, you would suddenly, if you were successful, have an army on the ground inside Russia without firing a shot that would be a rear guard to any forward Russian troops that would engage on the line of battle with along the border with NATO, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, etc. And you're in a position to march on Moscow where you could threaten the survival of the Russian government. That, coupled with an aerial invasion that just by chance, we have 250 planes in the air today, so maybe we'll use that. Yeah. That was kind of the landscape that I saw when this move came off. Now, there's an awful lot of projecting and supposing and deduction and all of that. I really don't know what happened. But if I had to, bust out a slide rule and take off my shoes so I could count with my toes or whatever and calculate what happened, this seems like a reasonable deduction. And then in addition to that, they flipped. And so it's what I'm thinking might be the case. And when I spoke with Mark today, he reminded me that there was a thing between the Russian government and and this mercenary force. It's one thing when your country is not a military, it's not militarized like the United States. For all the nonsense that they talk here, Russia only has one military base, maybe two, outside the country. The one in Tartus in Syria is the one that I know of. I forget, there might be one in Africa also. But in the main, Russia's entire military doctrine is one of defense. It's to defend the Russian homeland against invaders. And the United States looks like the most likely invader with 850 military bases that surround Russia and China. So when someone comes along and says, we have this private, we can put together this private military force, you don't have to impose a sort of a military culture on the society. We can give people jobs that are looking for a job and hire people that want to join a professional military organization, and will be at your disposal if you pay. That was allowed to happen, whether one thinks it was wise or not. And it was used by the Russian government when they went into this operation in Ukraine as a way of being able to engage with sufficient force to do the job they wanted to do without having to have a draft, without having to militarize the society, etc. But I'm certain the people in the government knew, anyone paying attention knows that you're creating potentially a fifth column in your own country, because you now have a military power that's not under the direct control of the government in the country. And that there's always a potential threat of a coup or some other thing. So all of that cooked together with the operation that's been going on in Ukraine, the call up of the 300,000 reservists, and, basically the professionalizing and stepping up of the Russian military to engage in a war with the U.S. and NATO, which is what they're involved in. You could see the writing on the wall for the professional force that the government had announced that they were basically going to offer contracts to the employees of the group of Wagner, and that meant basically they were going to the government was going to nationalize this guy's private army, and so there was some pushback from that was inevitable. So my guesstimate theory is that Langley or somebody pitched to Wagner, how'd you like to work for us? He's like, how much? They said, how much you want? They reached a deal. He made his announcements. Putin took his position and said, basically, you guys are not going to topple us like this, and we're going to take you out. And how much are they giving you? Well, we'll give you that, plus $20 or whatever. And that was settled. And so that whole situation was diffused. I'm totally guessing at what drove it, but the conditions were such that some, finagling was possible. And, there was a real threat from this group because they're not, in fact, government troops, and their loyalty was not to them. It turns out that the rank and file soldiers, their loyalty was to Russia, to the Russian state. And that, I'm sure, was part of the calculus when Wagner decided to have the CEO start vacationing in Belarus.
I think it's crazy the way everybody's trying to piece this together and think what's going on. But let's look at a couple different angles, because the Wagner Group is definitely like an offspring, an offshoot, right, of the Russian military. Mainly, it has a lot of Russian military. It's not like Blackwater, where they have African troops, like African child soldiers, that they eventually take them to other countries to use them. The Saudis use Pakistanis, they use Colombians. It's ridiculous what they do. Wagner, it was definitely an offshoot of the Russian government, but they are mercenaries. And you're suggesting that maybe with all this troop movement in the U.S., that we see a lot of the NATO drills that are going on. That's why there's some repositioning here. And at the same time, it's just too coincidental to not think for a second. I mean, there are people who think that MI6 was involved. I saw Ryan Dawson put something up about that. I saw Scott Ritter say something about the West being involved. But let's look and analyze Putin's government.
Mossad's another one, by the way. Mossad,
Yes.
I heard also.
Mossad, you'll hear all the. We don't have necessarily the receipts right now. Right now we're fishing. But you had said your analysis is based on what you had saw over the weekend with these drills, and plus the history that played a part into it. But let's analyze Putin's government for a second, because a lot of people don't realize that the Russian Federation is actually a government that has many moving pieces and entities there. It's not like Putin has 100% control and he can do what he wants. In fact, from what I've heard, and I learned a lot from Alexander McKay's video just recently, that Putin has oligarchs he's still dealing with that were there from the fall of the USSR, people who are very inclined and in tune with the capitalist system that are there. But he also has the Communist Party, which was very supportive of his war and not war, but the military actions in Ukraine. Like I said, they were actually funding and supporting supplies to Donbass. When Fiorella went to the Donbass, she goes, "Yeah, the real commies are over there in Donbass. There's a lot of them." So, and they were kind of attached to the Communist Party of Russia. What does Putin's government look like? So we have an understanding, because there's a lot of people who are saying, well, this attack was kind of finagled from within, maybe with a deal with the West, but Putin is going to have to clean up and sew up his government, and this low-hanging fruit that's causing him a lot of problems, maybe him making more of an alignment with the Communist Party, which he is not a communist, and I'm sure you'll give some information to that, But what does his government look like?
Well, okay, you've got there are three top officials. First of all, you have the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, is the penultimate official. It's like the president of the United States in essence. Nothing more really. There is also a prime minister. That's Mikhail Mishustin. He's been prime minister for 2 years, 3 years or so. That was before what's his face that was the president for a minute. Anyway, and then he's the number two. Mishustin is the number two person. If Putin falls off the balcony or whatever, something happens to him, Mishustin becomes president. Then there is, and you have the legislature. Excuse me, the Federal Assembly, it's called. And that has two houses. One is the Federation Council. That's the upper house. And the other is the State Duma, which is the lower house. The chair of the Federation Council is the number three person in the government. And her name is Valentina Matviyenko. And so if Putin and Mishustin are driving in a taxi and it gets hit by a truck or something, then she becomes president. The Federal Assembly performs the same function in Russia that the Congress performs here. I don't know if that's also where all the bribes go, like it is for the Congress here, but that's where the legislation is done for sure. And as I said before, it's bicameral. You have both the Federation Council and the Duma, two houses. And then legislation that comes out of there has to be signed off on by the president. And there are a variety of, I would say they used to be committees under this USSR, but more or less like cabinet position offices that review legislation as it's being shaped and then as it's on its way to the president, environmental and, industrial and, whatever, to see what the impacts will be. So the role of the president of Russia in reality is a constitutional role very similar to the role of the president of the United States. Now, and then there's a judiciary also. And the judiciary is a sort of an integrated it's similar to, first of all, Russian Federation is a federation. It like the United States is pretty much a federation. You have 50 individual political units in the United States, 50 states, literally. And then you have a federal government that is sort of, an umbrella over all of them. But the power of the state governments is, pretty much dominant within a state, and the federal government does not look like an assemblage of the state governments. In other words, the governor of New York, Massachusetts, Nevada, whatever, doesn't pick a representative to send to Washington to make legislation. The people do, at least nominally. And so that government in Washington stands on its own rather than on the shoulders of the state governments. There's a different relationship of the regional and republic governments in Russia than there is here. And it is actually, in many ways, much more democratic, much closer to a like self-government. Yeah. And so the judiciary reflects this in terms of both the structure of the court systems, which I'm not real deep on, but I have a good sketch understanding of it, and also in terms of the selection of judges, and also, by the way, in terms of some of the rules and regulations governing the judiciary. So there's a uniform code, but there are also more local variants of it that come to bear. All right, long story short, if it's not too late for that, the president of the Russian Federation does not have structurally or constitutionally more power than the president of the United States, and in some ways not in any way, because the president of the United States is a commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, which, as I mentioned, has 850 bases scattered around the planet, the largest budget in the history of the world.
Would you say really quickly, Don, not to interrupt, but would you say that Joe Biden as an American president has more control over the military than Putin of the Russian Federation has control over his military? Or is it,
well,
your thoughts? Because,
yes. Nominally, yes. See, Joe Biden, we don't know if he has control of his bowels, literally. Okay. But Joe Biden is the formal, person in charge of all of that. Yeah. And whatever orders are given have to go through him. Now, whether he's being given orders on little file cards or, whatever, that's a separate question. But literally, Biden has more power than Putin does over the military, just by virtue of the relative power of the U.S. military. Otherwise, their roles are probably identical. Commander-in-chief, that's what each of them are.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the subject to, except in emergency, situations, subject to control by the legislature. Putin also is, is constrained by the, Federal Assembly.
He doesn't have his own AUMF.
Well, in the same way that presidents do. I mean, when's the last time there was a congressional declaration of war? We sure have had a lot of wars, though.
World War II?
Yeah, that's correct.
Vietnam, no. I mean, Korea, no. Iraq, no.
Yeah, if you want to call the what do you call it? The
AUMF,
the authorization use of military force, AUMF,
an application of Congress to the complete powers of the commander-in-chief. Complete.
Right. Yeah. So something that's an important thing to keep in mind, however. Putin has a lot more power than Biden does as president for one simple reason. He enjoys support of the population, on the order of 60 to 70%, depending on the day, whereas Biden has not ever had 50% or more. And at that, the support that he has is not very deep. I would say half the support for Biden, if in the absence of Donald Trump, evaporates. That essentially that half of that support is hardcore anti-Trump and viewing Biden as the only thing to keep him out. Putin's situation is entirely different. He is so popular that the main opposition party there, the communists, don't attack him directly. It's not because they're afraid of him. It's because they're afraid of losing their support among the population.
Got it. What about his Congress? You said what's the branch equal to the United States Congress?
Right. Well, okay. Yeah, that's
what's that called again? Are they split as much as we are in the United States? I mean, do they have more
No,
movable parts, or
there are there's a number of other parties that I forget what they call Putin's party now. It was United Russia and some other iterations. The second party behind them, about half the in terms of polling, generally about half the amount of support of the majority party is the Communist Party. There's a new Communist Party. There's really sort of a CIA Communist Party. But the CPRF, which is the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which is the successor to the CPSU, they are the next, and there is an awful lot of horse trading that goes on in the legislature there over legislation. The Communist Party, as you might and guess, is very strong on workers' rights, very much against nationalization, privatization. Privatization, not nationalization. The things that are sort of hallmarks of late stage capitalism, there's an awful lot of indulgence in those things with Russian characteristics by United Russia that the Communist Party opposes, and they play parliamentary games to try to get their way on these things, and they're successful very often.
Yeah. So, what is, in your mind, Putin's biggest challenge within his own government right now? Because I did hear a lot of talks about there is, and I don't know exactly what's what. You have a better understanding of what's going over in the government, but I heard somebody say over the weekend, like, he's going to have to maybe go to the Communist Party and have more an alignment with them, more nationalization. The whole having this Wagner Group is not something that the Communist Party would want. They would want mercenaries. They would want more unity within inside their own country to build their government. And from what I understand, they were moving Wagner, integrating it into the Russian military anyways, because a lot of pressure from the communists, from what I understand. What do you think his biggest challenges are within his own government moving forward? If this is a somehow coordinated attack from within, maybe fronted financially by the U.S. and whatnot, what are his greatest challenges?
Well, all right. First, I don't want to pretend to know what goes on in anyone's head, particularly Vladimir Putin's head in this crisis. On the other hand, what's in whose interest can very often be, very clear. For the president and or government of a nation state to have a military on its soil that is responsible not to the government but to some private party is a problem. It may be a convenient tool that can be used in an emergency, but it is a fundamental problem, and it is destined to become, sort of the soil in which a power struggle will take place. Prigozhin has expressed on other occasions, I thought myself, somewhat intemperately, given that you're involved in a war, public, challenges to the judgment and or the honesty of the government officials that are in charge of dealing with the war, with his firm personally, etc. And certainly the communists perhaps have an ideological, problem with a private military force. And in fact, when you speak of a private military force, the word fascism comes to mind, because this is kind of the modality that you have in fascism. When you have corporate control of the state, which is in essence fascism, obviously corporate control of the military, as in direct ownership of the military apparatus, it's a handmaiden to that kind of thing. And so whether or not the communists were opposed to it, I think President Putin's personal interest as a politician and also the president, whoever it might be, and the government, whoever might serve in that government, would have a problem with this force loose on its own territory. So that was being resolved anyway. It was a convenience, so they didn't have to quickly mobilize the country and put it on a military footing, and therefore generate opposition to making the move that they did with the SMO. And now that they have a handle on what's going on the ground there, it was a natural move anyway for the government to bring these troops into the government's army. Where that would leave the owners of Wagner, Prigozhin, and other shareholders, whoever they might be, we don't know. I have no idea what was going on with any of those discussions, and I haven't heard anyone say anything that I thought was authoritative on that point. So, but it's clear that if I have a thriving business, and it also gives me a certain amount of power vis-a-vis the state in one of the most powerful states on the planet, so when someone wants to take that away from me, unless they're going to give me either a really big check or share power with me, we're going to be tussling over this. And I think that's probably at least part of what we witnessed here.
Yeah. The positive thing I think you pointed out too as well about having a mercenary group is it allowed them to maybe mobilize faster, or did it also kind of take off a little pressure from Putin's government? The fact that he didn't have to call up right away a lot of his countrymen to mobilize and start getting into the military and start enlisting into the military for this. I mean, it seems like a political positive why he did this. Yeah.
You're talking to somebody that was protesting the draft when I was 16 years old, looking at being drafted when I was 18, along with millions of others. It was almost, the basis for, certainly there was an uprising in process in the United States. If there were an external enemy fighting a war with the United States, and I don't mean Vietnam fighting us off in their country, but somebody fighting a war on the Canadian and Mexican borders, shooting at Americans in there. If that was going on while we were in the streets protesting those very wars and saying we're not going to go, that's an existential threat to the country. And so they were able to avoid that situation and use the resources that were at hand at that moment, that were there for better or worse. They were put to a useful, application. And so, they were able to avoid that kind of, political issue as they geared up, to conduct the operation. Now that's served its purpose. And now you're looking at the cost benefits, balance. And now the costs outweigh the benefits. We can handle these other things on our own now. And as a matter of fact, if you guys want to fight this war, we're going to pay you on Friday instead of Prigozhin. That's all.
Somebody put down this one-day coup only cost the U.S. the $6 billion. I think that was the $6 billion that the Pentagon found under their couch from their miscalculating of money. And, we got this. Maybe we could support a coup. Thank you so much, Zachary. That's so great. So just to wrap this up before we get to the news cycle wet dream of civil war from the friggin' U.S. neocons, and show some of the shit going on there and talk about that, because some of the information that was coming out here online and social media, on the mainstream media, was laughable. And it was almost like they were having a coup orgasm, a civil war orgasm that they thought was going to take place. I'd still like your opinion moving forward, but just give us a wrap up very simply. What exactly happened, why the Wagner Group stopped, just in a couple sentences, and where do we go? Where does Putin go from here?
Okay, again, mostly speculation, derived, derivative speculation, deductions from, and processed with historical understanding, whatever. I'm looking at a couple of precedents. One, you have to try to get inside the head, if it doesn't scare you, of the strategic planners in the United States. CIA, the supposedly smartest guys in the room. It's like the room might be a bathroom or a phone booth. But if you look at the Bay of Pigs, for example, we're going to go in and we're going to blow up some stuff. And as soon as we land, the Cuban people are going to rise up against the evil dictator Fidel Castro. And so what we're doing really doesn't require a lot of commitment in terms of time or resources, but we need that punch up front. so that the people feel like the leash has been cut and they can stand up and fight for themselves. And it was a daydream. It was a fantasy. It was actually a fake narrative that was constructed to induce John Kennedy and company to commit the resources they needed to fight a war with Cuba. That meant an aerial attack, what they called air cover, but they wanted to blow up stuff all over Cuba and take out the military defenses so that this ragtag collection of dissidents that they'd rounded up, along with some Americans dressed up like Cubans, could roll in and take over Havana. There's some of that wishful thinking here. Apparently, the thought was that once we heard from Prigozhin about the corruption in Moscow, that he was going to clean up, and he had an image of himself as a hero buying the PR that they were getting because of the Bakhmut and some other victories that had been credited to Wagner. The underlying assumption is that there's tremendous mass unrest in Russia, just waiting for someone to, pop the cork off the bottle. It'll all come flowing out. That didn't happen at all, as a matter of fact. And when the president went on television and said that this is what's happening and everybody can stay calm, we're going to take care of it, etc., most of the people that I spoke to in Moscow, that was the end of it for them. Some of them were watching it still to see where it went, but most people went back to what they were doing. Again, the support for the government in Russia, if you gave everyone in the United States, a drug, a happy drug, they wouldn't score that high in terms of their satisfaction with the government. We have a Congress with somewhere between 8 and 20% favorables, depending on the week, tops 20, 22%. And there again, 60 to 70% or higher. The president of the United States, hovering between 35 and 45, he's at the level where Richard Nixon was the day before he was forced to resign office. And Putin steadily 60, 65, 70%. So, the idea that they were going to somehow, pop, a balloon or something, and the Russian people were going to run out into the street and overthrow the government on behalf of Langley was a delusion. Yeah. And I think it was a false one, again, intended to both puff up Prigozhin's sense of who he was and also as an organizing principle for all of the military forces that they've assembled and that they had aloft at the time, and to get the media on board in case there actually was a war. If there was a march on Moscow, there would have been, some bloodshed. That bloodshed would have been, an inducement. Basically, that would have been, the battle cry in the media that Putin is killing his own people. He's strafing them from the air. We need a no-fly zone, all this other stuff. And it didn't materialize. It's like the flowers in the barrels of guns in Iraq as well. We're going to bomb the hell out of Baghdad, shock and awe, and then we're going to invade. And when our troops reach Baghdad, the people are going to rise up against the dictator Saddam and give flowers to our troops. It's like a child's nursery tale or something. And that was a good part of the narrative that they were spinning, that they were already starting to roll out. Unfortunately, on the ground, it's not how it played out.
Yeah. Let's take a look at Nikki Haley, some of the neocons, and then we're going to play a couple. We're going to go Haley. We're going to go Anthony Blinken, because no neocon party, cookie party would be complete without, Anthony Blinken, and also Representative Turner. But let's take a look at Nikki Haley. She's running to be the president of the United States. Talk about peace in our future. Listen to this.
Talk about delusional.
As president, as a commander-in-chief, if you are elected, what would you be doing differently than, say, the front runner, Donald Trump?
I would already be on the phone with Zelensky and all of our NATO allies, talking about how we're going to handle this going forward, looking at the opportunities with Putin being very distracted to go and see how we can move this further. I would also say this is a time we should be very much strongly in support of Ukraine, and our allies need to be speaking loudly for Ukraine. This is a time where we should be pushing Putin to get out of Ukraine and to make sure that we're all standing with a strong force. This is an opportunity that requires action, and it requires action from all of the alliance and with Zelensky. Putin is distracted. He's caught flat-footed. He's got very few options, And this is a time where we need to be on our game and make sure that we handle this appropriately.
As president,
Don, she did say some things. This is a chance. This is an opportunity. I mean, she didn't say let's go and remove him like Lindsey Graham was pretty much tweeting all this weekend. Let's go. This is what we talked about. But she did say some things. We talked to Zelensky, our allies. Let's mobilize. Let's make sure we take advantage of this. Seems just very reactionary from the conservative right of America, what we can expect from any of these candidates moving forward. Go ahead, buddy.
I feel like when I see Nikki Haley, like somebody visited one of the local high schools and pulled out like the second runner-up of the debate club, dressed them up in like some, we found these at the secondhand store, like at Goodwill or something, and then put her out there, slapped on a little bit of lipstick and put her in front of a microphone and said, go do your best. She's not world class. Like she's like a, I don't know, like a high school debate person or something. Not a high school either.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, her representing the United States at the UN under Donald Trump was just ridiculous. Let's go to Anthony Blinken next, because once again, what would a neoconservative party look like without Anthony Blinken? Not Anthony, ladies and gentlemen, Anthony.
Just on Nikki Haley, when Trump sent her to the UN, I think that was a sop to the people that want to pull the U.S. out of the UN. I think basically he sent her there to show he held the UN in contempt.
She was probably one of the dumbest representatives. Every time she opened her mouth. But here, I love this guy. Let's go,
He's a full-fledged sociopath, this one.
Dude.
Is the U.S. ready for further unrest in Russia and the scenario that Vladimir Putin does not remain in power?
Look at his eyes.
Margaret, this is an unfolding story, and I think we're in the midst of a moving picture. We haven't seen the last act. We're watching it very closely and carefully. But just step back for a second and put this in context. 16 months ago, Russian forces were on the doorstep of Kyiv in Ukraine, thinking they'd take the city in a matter of days, thinking they would erase Ukraine from the map as an independent country. Now, over this weekend, they've had to defend Moscow, Russia's capital, against mercenaries of Putin's own making. Prigozhin himself, in this entire incident, has raised profound questions about the very premises for Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the first place, saying that Ukraine or NATO did not pose a threat to Russia, which is part of Putin's narrative, right. And it was a direct challenge to Putin's authority. So this raises profound questions. It shows real cracks. We can't speculate or know exactly where that's going to go. We do know that Putin has a lot more to answer for in the weeks and months ahead.
Send more money. That's what we can do right now. There's a crack in his armor. You know, I think it was also interesting that you were talking about today when they were talking about Anthony Blinken and they were talking about Kiev. You know, they always made this argument that Kiev fought back the Russian forces, when it always appeared to me that they never really wanted to go into Kiev, that they just wanted to make sure that there was a lot of the army and the military to stay in Kiev to defend it, so therefore they can concentrate with less troops in the Donbass region. Is that also true too as well?
You know, every time Blinken talks, I spend, my brain just like rolls over. He has somebody, I didn't see who it was, I don't have my glasses on, wrote that he's got dead machine eyes. This is a sociopath. Like, they did all these snap diagnoses of Trump when he was president. He's got borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, blah, blah, blah. You look at Blinken, that's a sociopath right there. Dead eyes, absolutely no affectation whatsoever. Lies, boldly looking you right in the face and lying his behind off. I really can't focus on anything after I see him for like 10 minutes, just processing, my God, what went into creating this thing? It's like a social Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
He is horrible.
In terms of Putin's position, in terms of whatever he said, rattling his cage or cracking his facade or whatever the nonsense attempted metaphor was, what happened was a mercenary force that Putin, quote unquote, that the Russian government had employed to basically stymie the efforts by the United States and the European vassals in NATO to take down the Russian government that began really in 1917, but in 2014 with the coup, with the declaration of war on the Russians in Ukraine, with the attempt to seize the military base at Sevastopol and elsewhere in Crimea. All of that failed. And then the attempt to eject the Russians from Ukraine failing, even though, according to the media every day here and every one of those liars in Washington, the plucky Ukrainians are whooping the Russians. Somehow Ukraine keeps shrinking through that process. And the population of Ukraine shrinks even faster. The ones that aren't being sacrificed on the battlefield for God knows what are running as fast as they can. They're finding out in Europe that the employment opportunities that they were talking about more likely dancing around a pole with half your clothes on than working as a lawyer or a doctor or whatever you had trained for in university in the Soviet Union or in Ukraine. That the people who have left Ukraine for the West are finding themselves in a very, very difficult position. The money that was there as showcase money has been run out. The people in the host countries who themselves are starving because of their government's actions and theft and waste in Ukraine are not anxious to share with yet another wave of immigrants who are fleeing from a war that their own governments are inflicting on their countries. So there's this whole big pot of mess that's stirring in Europe. Meanwhile, Russia, the economy's growing, the people are doing well, and even with the terrorist attacks blowing up Dugina and the guy up in Petersburg and a couple of other things, the bridge and the dam in Ukraine and all the other stuff, even with all of that, their cities are way safer than, say, Chicago or New York or Washington or Los Angeles. And there's missing from the landscape are the familiar scenes that we have here, such as whole neighborhoods of people that are zonked out on smack or fentanyl, homeless people all over the place who are forced to live outdoors because they can't afford to live indoors anywhere in the country. This horrible condition and the frightening position that Vladimir Putin is in looks like heaven, with him sitting on God's throne compared to the situation in the United States and Europe for the common people. And the common people know it, and the leaders that have any sense left in them know it, and they realize that they're the ones in a precarious position right now. So I think what we're hearing is projecting.
Yep. Super Ray tip came in from Gregory Walker, just says, Pasta, this is just a ploy by Vladdy Daddy to find the rabble-rousers in the Merck Group. My guess is some high ranks catch a case of the dyes in the near future. Catch a case of the dyes in the near future? All right.
Where? Where are they talking about? Here or there?
My guess is some high ranks catch a case of the dyes in the near future.
Yeah, but the high rankers
the Merck Group, I guess. I don't know.
Or...
I think he was saying within the group. I think he was talking maybe people loyal to Prigozhin. I don't know.
I see.
From what I understand, and we have one more neocon to talk about, and then we have Putin giving a little speech this morning that not everybody in the Wagner Group was with this. That there's a lot of people that were within the Wagner Group that were like, no, we're not going to play a part of this. And they also made a deal. Lukashenko made a deal with Putin, obviously communicating with Putin the majority of the time, to not only let Prigozhin go and stay in Belarus, but to drop any charges against the other members of the Wagner Group. Are they going to be essentially removed in your mind as they integrate the rest of the loyalists into the Russian military?
I think, first of all, it's an interesting thing that the dynamic here is not the usual one with a mercenary group. You mentioned before, when you look at BlackRock and these other mercenary groups, the rank and file are sort of like a foreign legion. They recruit from people, the poorest people around the world that are looking for an opportunity to, to come to America or Europe, to make some money, etc. And so, if you insert them into this country or that country, they don't have any, there's no dissonance. There's no conflicting feelings about it. I'm on a job. I'm going to shoot them. I'm going to shoot them, etc. Wagner Group, in the main, those people are Russians. And if they're going to start shooting at Russians, they're going to be shooting at their family members and friends and colleagues and people they went to school with and all of that. That is an entirely different dynamic. Now, it's one thing if somehow you convince a group of people that this is good for the country, that the government is corrupt, that the conditions in the country are such that something needs to be done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you got to be pretty damn convincing, and reality has to correspond at least partially to that pitch. And this is a hard sell under the conditions here. Again, Russia, I talk to people there every day, as do you. The difficulties from sanctions are at the level of, well, this is Mark Sloboda. When I buy Parmesan cheese now, I have difficulty getting Italian Parmesan cheese, so I have to get the Russian kind, but it's good. Like that. Rather than, the image people have of Russians in a black and white movie standing online, in shabby clothes waiting for, brown wrapped packages of shoddy goods. It's not like that at all. It's, when you approach Moscow, you almost hear the Munchkins singing. It's like you're approaching the city. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. It's historic. I heard the subways are museums. It's beautiful. Dan Kovalik, who I'll be seeing in Nicaragua. Unfortunately, you won't be there because you have a different trip going on. But seeing Kovalik was just in Russia, and he was talking about how beautiful it was. So I can't wait to talk to him about it. Fee just can't stop bragging about it. She loves it. When I was on with Peter Lavelle, he was talking about how beautiful it is. Mark Sloboda always talks about it. Let's bring on our last neocon for the day.
Let's go, baby.
But it's Representative Mike Turner. You know what I'm saying? I didn't even bring a clip of all. I think Alex Rubinstein had it where the papers went crazy. This coup is the beginning of the end for Putin. It's all doomed. Civil war, yada yada, and then it ended so quickly. Yeah, Representative Mike Turner.
I want to talk a bit about China here as well, sir, but let me just button up. How would you define the relationship between China and Vladimir Putin right now?
Right. So President Xi's got to be very concerned right now because, as you know, he went to Moscow, stood next to Putin and said, we're together, he and Vladimir Putin are bringing about change that hasn't happened for 100 years. And of course, that is the march of authoritarianism against democracy that we won in World War II that they're now rising up against. But now he's standing next to a guy who can't even control his own military. Remember, Putin in his national address said that these individuals are going to have inevitable punishment. And then in the end, Prigozhin gets a vacation in Belarus, and his troops are now going to sign contracts. It sounds more like paperwork than a KGB agent doing inevitable punishment. Xi, in seeing that with Putin, has got to understand that Putin's stature in the world has diminished. That diminishes President Xi. And certainly as Putin looks weakened, certainly not being able to control his military and being a strong nuclear power, President Xi has to be worried about the stability of Russia itself.
I want to say something.
Say it, buddy.
On this point, okay? So what you had here, for those who were confused about the meaning of the word, okay, because they got a problem. I guess the thesaurus and the dictionary that used to be on every journalist's desk back in the old days when journalists were literate and when they were familiar with history and politics and government and reality. The word insurrection looks like this, where you have an armed group of people who are threatening to take power by force of arms and are reasonably equipped to make a reasonable effort at it. That's what an insurrection looks like. Not a bunch of protesters, some of whom breached the doors to the Capitol building, following a guy with horns and somebody taking a dump on a legislator's desk. That's not an insurrection. However, the insurrection, quote unquote, on January 6th should strike fear into the heart of every American. The Democratic Republic was shaken to its foundation. our Constitution was under imminent threat. Listen to everything that came out of the mouths of liars like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, the whole lot of them on both sides, McConnell and all of them, even McCarthy. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, this actual insurrection, this weak, terrible dictator, clueless, fading from the scene guy, Vladimir Putin, put it away in about 9 hours without any bloodshed after the initial volley by the insurrectionists, found a way to accommodate it without jail time even, let alone running around the country for 2 or 3 years afterwards, trying to find people who were around to throw them in jail for 15 years. Who do you think feels more secure in their position of power? And who do you think, based on these things, has the right to feel more secure in their position of power? When I hear a clown like this last Turner say things like that, it makes me think, Jesus, they know it's really about to topple even more than I do. Because you couldn't possibly arrive at the conclusion that it's coming out of his mouth if you were doing it fairly.
Let's listen to Putin's speech. I mean, it's laughable. The mainstream media is doing what the mainstream does. I pulled up something in my emails, and it says a visibly angry stresses failure of the Wagner Group, and it's always like, the next thing is, this is a crack. Don't you believe for 1,000% that they're going to use this to be able to fund more money? Why would we let our foot off the gas now? Look what just happened. Putin's army just almost turned on him. Let's send more millions and millions and billions of dollars. No, I mean, that's what they're going to do. It's just the same thing they always do. They're full of shit.
As promised, taking you straight to the Russian president now. Let's listen in.
For your patience, your consolidation and patriotism. This civil solidarity has shown that any attempts to blackmail us and to spur internal chaos are doomed. We have shown supreme consolidation of society and executive authorities of all levels, a firm and clear position of support for the constitutional order was taken by civil organizations, religious faiths, and leading political parties. Practically all Russian society, everyone were united by their sense of responsibility for the fate of the country. Since the very beginning of these events, all the necessary decisions to neutralize the threat were taken and to protect the constitutional order, lives, and safety of our citizens. The armed mutiny would have been suppressed in any case. Despite their loss of reason, the participants could not understand that, including the fact that they engaged in criminal actions, splitting apart the country, which is now facing colossal external threats and pressures. When our comrades are dying at the front lines, holding on whatever the cost, but the mutineers betrayed their country, their people, and they betrayed those who they dragged into this affair, who they pushed to shoot at their comrades. It is this fratricide that the new Nazis in Kiev and their Western masters wanted to see, and the various traitors as well. They wanted to see Russian soldiers kill each other. They wanted to see Russian servicemen and civilians die, and ultimately to see Russia defeated and the Russian society split apart and in a bloodbath. They didn't want to take responsibility for failures in the war and with the so-called counteroffensive, but they miscounted. The law enforcement authorities and the military were loyal to their oath and to their people and to their duty. The courage and sacrifice of the pilots who died prevented a tragedy on a national scale. At the same time, we know that most soldiers and commanders of the Wagner Group are also patriots of Russia, loyal to their state. They proved this with their courage in combat, liberating the Donbass and Novorossiya. They were used blindly. They were thrown against their comrades with whom they fought shoulder to shoulder for its future. So since the very beginning, I gave orders to prevent bloodshed, and we needed time for that, including to give an opportunity to those who realize they've made a mistake to rethink their decision, to realize that they're putting society at risk, and that this is leading to destructive consequences as a result of this reckless affair. I thank the soldiers and commanders of the Wagner Group who made the only correct decision and refused to engage in the fratricide and who stopped at the last line. Today, you have an opportunity to continue your service to Russia by signing a contract with the Ministry of Defense or other authorities, or go back to your families. Those who wish may go to Belarus. The promise I gave will be fulfilled. I repeat, the choice is up to you. But I'm sure that this will be a choice of Russia's warriors who realize their tragic mistake. I'm grateful to President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, for his efforts and his contribution to the peaceful resolution of the situation. But I repeat, it is the patriotic spirit of people, the consolidation of the entire Russian society, that played the deciding role in these days. This support allowed us to overcome this hard challenge. Thank you for this. I'm grateful.
You know,
Your thoughts? My bad.
I'm watching the chat, and a number of people are saying that it's amazing to have a president, first of all, that can speak in complete sentences. That's choosing. Let's find a way to de-escalate this. Let's try to avoid bloodshed. Let's not thump ourselves in the chest and have another explosion of power and arrogance and belligerence and all of that. It's as a rational manager looking at a problem and trying to work towards a solution, and expressing concern for the welfare of the people whose job it is to look out for. We don't have that. I would say, I'd like to point to someone to say, someone like that. But the last person that we had as president of the United States exited, with a bullet hole in his head. It's been a really long time since we had anyone that you could arguably say had empathy with the people of the country and some measure of concern for them. And by the way, wasn't an outright sociopath ready to go to war and kill a few tens or hundreds of thousands of people, for somebody that's going to make a couple extra dollars for their trouble. This is something that's unfamiliar to us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great analysis today. I do. When I heard RFK do a speech the other day, you got to cover it. And I was like, wow. I mean, the way he's speaking right now, and I think the education that he is bringing to the table, the political discourse, and the ability, I think, to speak to the left and right is so important. We've had a show before. We've talked about this. I think it's not a really obtainable rationalization to think that he can really actually make it to the White House the way the system is set up, that they will probably never let him win the Democratic, nomination. However, it is so beneficial, I think, when you have certain conversations out there and somebody's talking across the board about our foreign policy. Yeah, he sucks. He's a Zionist. He sucks, obviously, or he's pro-Zionism, whatever you want to say. He said he's pro-Israeli. We went up together, and that's when we caught him with that question. but so many other things he's talking about, I think, is so necessary. And you see people like Vladimir Putin, the way he talks. We don't have that. Instead, we have a guy in the name of Joe Biden who obviously you said can't control his own bowel movements, let alone control anything. But they're literally doing the Indian national anthem as Modi's in town, and he's pulling his hand over his heart like they're doing the American national anthem. Then he slowly starts moving it down and just drops it. That's what we're dealing with over here, Don. Any final words before you get on out, buddy? I know you got a lot of things going on.
Yeah. Help!
Right.
I'm going to be on the road till August 1st. I'm going to China first, and I'm hoping when I get there, I'll be able to connect. And if that's possible, I'll let you know as soon as I find out.
We would love to get some commentating from you on the ground over in China. It would be amazing. So please let me know if you can do that. We're here. We'll be in Nicaragua next month for about a week.
Say hi to Steven and everybody. I assume also my other friend will be there too. So
we'll have a great time. That's everybody. Don Debar. Don, let everybody know where they can find you. I know we put up your blog, but where else can they go? I know you got a Twitter. Where can they find some of the other links? Maybe get some news from your KPFK show. Is it? No, it's not KPFK, is it?
Well, I would say on Wednesday they'll be able to find me in Urumqi, but
that's it,
which is in northwest China. I'm going to be. I will say hello, definitely. I'm Don Debar on Facebook. It's Don D-O-N like Nancy, Debar D-E-B-A-R. Also at Don Debar, one word, at Twitter. And also at Truth, whatever that is, the Trump thing, and also at VK Don Debar, VK.com. It's like Victor Carl, VK.com, Don Debar there. Whatever other platforms. Oh, on YouTube, youtube.com/Don Debar, one word, D as in David, O, N as in Nancy, D as in David, E, B as in Bob, A-R, Don Debar. That's me.
Awesome. Don, have a safe trip. We love you. We'll see you soon,
Thank
brother.
you, Pasta. Love you too, brother. You take care. Give Fee my best. I hope she sees this at some point. Hope she's enjoying the assignment, and I'll catch you guys up soon.
You got it, brother. Be safe. Don